Yeah, we're having some drinks and beverages over here. So if everyone can make their way back to their seats, we're going to start the panel conversation, just trying to stay on time here. So our moderator for this afternoon's panel discussion on technology's global impact on the future of education is Dr. Stephanie Doscher. Dr. Doscher is a higher education leader who partners with colleagues and institutions to achieve bold goals for learning and vision for change. She's the author of Making Global Learning Universal, Promoting Inclusion and Success for All Students, a comprehensive handbook for engaging all undergraduates in collaborative global problem solving with diverse others. She also hosts Making Global Learning Universal podcast. Stephanie currently serves as director of FIU's institution-wide Global Learning for Global Citizenship initiative. She is also the program evaluator for FIU's Title VI funded Kimberly Green Latin American and Caribbean National Resource Center, and is a faculty fellow in FIU's Center for Leadership. So I will turn it over now to Dr. Stephanie Doscher to introduce the panel.
All right. So good to see so many familiar faces and be with you this afternoon. And I just have to say that I'm humbled and I guess a bit gobsmacked to be on this stage, sharing this stage, and hopefully sharing the screen with you as well with our guest from Singapore to discuss technology's impact on education. Ah, yes, there she is. Hi, Ayesha.
Hi, everyone.
So I'll just take a moment to introduce you once again, for those of you who may have just joined us, to our panelists, and then we'll dive right into the conversation. So to my immediate right, we have Provost Kenneth Furton. And a lot of you already know a lot about our provost, that he leads our institution as the chief academic leader of the institution, but you may not know that, he talks a big game about disruption and innovation, but that's because he is a disruptor and innovator. You may not realize that Provost Furton is a fellow of the National Academy of Inventors. And this is the highest professional distinction that is accorded solely to academic inventors who have demonstrated a prolific spirit of innovation in creating and facilitating outstanding inventions that have made a tangible impact on society. And he is an expert in detecting sense and has applied his knowledge and skills to, of all things, creating an electronic nose that can not just have security implications, which we would think about, but also can be used to even detect diseases in avocado trees. So a really wide range of applications. So very excited to talk about technology and education with our provost from his point of view as an innovator. And you just heard from Jaime Casap, who, as you know, is an education guru for Google. And I would like to introduce you to someone who's joining us from another time and another place, and that's Ayesha Khanna, Dr. Khanna. She's joining us from Singapore, where it is 2 a.m. Yeah, so right on. We're impressed already. Ayesha is co-founder and CEO of ADDO AI, an artificial intelligence advisory firm and incubator. ADDO means to add in Latin. So Ayesha said that her company, they believe that if you add machine learning and artificial intelligence to your work, you can massively power your businesses, your services, and most importantly, democratize access to these services and products to the middle class. Ayesha contends that AI is fundamentally going to disrupt the way that we do business. It's going to change everything from the way that companies interact with clients, the way that their employees work, to the very manufacturing processes that they use to create their products. But here's the thing. Ayesha does not envision a world that is an Orwellian state, or mass unemployment, as Jaime was talking about before, or a world in which the robots are going to take over. This is the world I fear. I don't know about you, but I fear this world. Instead, she says the mission of her work is to amplify human potential, to provide a way that humans can stand on the shoulders of machines. And so I think that this is a perfect spot to begin our conversation. How can technology amplify human potential? This is why I was saying that I felt a little bit gobsmacked to be here, because I'm very focused as a Gen Y person on human-to-human contact. And so for me, for a long time as an educator, technology felt like a barrier. Technology was the fear factor. But recently, my perspective has been changing. And through collaborative online international learning, pairing faculty with faculty across time and space the way we are now, students and students, I'm starting to realize that technology is going to amplify institutions' ability to reach our mission, which is to exchange and produce new knowledge. So my perspective on technology and education is starting to change, my core beliefs. So let's open it up for a dialogue about our core beliefs about technology and education. Ayesha, let's begin with you, bring you into the room. Could you share with us your why, the deepest thoughts and feelings that you have about technology and education, why you've devoted your life to this?
Yes, well, hello everybody. It's great to speak to you from Singapore. I think the fact that I am in Asia influences a lot of my perspective on technology. And also bear in mind that I didn't come into technology directly as a child, coding since I was a little child. I actually started off with an economics and human rights background. So I spent a lot of time in jails and villages, helping women with microfinance and other such things. So I have a very human-centric approach to technology. And I have experienced firsthand that the emerging middle class in Asia, and 5 people join the middle class every second, the majority of them in Asia, Latin America, and Africa, their social mobility is very much dependent on their education skills, especially now that places like Pakistan are the second leading places for digital workers. There's no way in an elitist society where only money gets you into the best universities. These people who are just emerging and moving to cities and coming to the middle class would have those opportunities without the free courses that are available everywhere, without the ability, and since I work in artificial intelligence and coding, even the ability for all the free sites that are there and the mentorship they can get through connected networks like LinkedIn. What I'm seeing is a very optimistic society. On the other hand, Singapore is more developed, so it's more like the US and the Europe in that way. We are more focused over here, not only on the optimism, but also having an ethical governance framework. And so the two married together is what makes me optimistic. I think one without the other is foolhardy.
Mm-hmm. Jaime.
Okay, my turn. All right, so I always find that kind of phrase, the technology and education, interesting for a couple of reasons. Number one is we don't talk about technology and anything else that way, right? We don't say technology in conferences, technology in transportation, technology in finance, right? For some reason it's already blended in there, but in education it doesn't seem to have blended yet, right? That's one. Two is, what is technology in education, right? how do you define technology? Are we saying cloud computing? Are we saying a laptop? Because, you know, if you define technology in its purest form, technology was motion pictures in the 1900s that were introduced in education. It was television in the 1950s, and we've been introducing computers and technology since the 60s in education. I was told by ninth grade, look, I was in ninth grade like 134 years ago, and I was told by a ninth grade teacher, that computers were going to be important in the future. This is in ninth grade, and I took a programming class. My first programming class was BASIC, a language that we need to bring back. I learned how to program in BASIC, and I wrote 5,000 lines of code to make a bird fly across a Commodore 64. Do you guys remember that? Yeah, it wasn't even a bird. It was just a dash line that just went up and down. So we have been talking about technology in education for so long that what I want us to do is stop talking about technology in education and just talk about education. And then how do we use the tools that are available to us to bring the best ideas out?
All right. Yeah. So how are we doing that here?
So it's actually, following up on Jamie's, interesting, because my fundamental belief is that technology, as it has evolved to at this point and where it's heading in terms of 5G and the advances, for the first time really can change education, which hasn't really changed for about 2,400 years. So you go back 2,400 years ago, Plato created what we call the academy, that the faculty like to talk about. And then one of his students, Aristotle, after about 20 years, left the academy and created his own education system, but it really never has changed in 2,400 years. And so we're seeing disruption in the sense of online, as we call it now, which is still really the very basic beginnings of a virtual campus, is now it's our second largest campus, second only to this campus. And within 10 years, our virtual campus will be the largest campus of FIU. What does that mean? And so with technology well done, it allows a complete transformation for faculty to teach in different ways, to use different tools. But I agree with you. It's not that technology is, actually with both of you, that the technology is going to be liberating for the faculty. And really, for the first time, we can think about it in a completely different perspective, rather than just saying, well, we'll videotape our lectures and mail them to the students. That was our idea of distance learning. And now it's, varying levels of quality in online classes. But when you really have a virtual campus and you really have virtual reality and you really have AI that can help facilitate the learning, you can completely change how you teach.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm just going to add, also words matter, right? And education, again, as I said earlier, is a process word, right? Something that you go through. What we should really be focusing on is learning, right? And how does technology impact learning? And I think that makes it more exciting, because learning then becomes not through an education system, but a thing that anyone can do given the world that we have in front of us, right? That opens up the dialogue on what is learning and how can we use digitalization and the tools available to learn at a completely different level than we've had in the past.
Okay, so then let me throw in another ingredient. How does technology enable learning? Through teaching, right? So we talk a lot about the digital literacies that our students need to have, but what are the digital literacies that our teachers need to have? And do we have to wait? Can we even wait for the students of today to become the teachers of tomorrow if they don't have the teachers of today? So how can we quickly enable our faculty, our K-12 teachers, even our preschool educators, lifelong learning educators, to have the skills that they need to impart those digital literacies and use technology?
Well, let's take a step back.
Yeah.
And I like to say this and make sure that we're on the same page. We've assumed that this generation knows how to use technology. They don't. They actually don't know how to use technology. Stanford study showed us that 82% of elementary school kids can't tell you the difference between a sponsored website and a news site. I saw a study in a high school where 136 high school students couldn't find you a search result if it didn't show up on the first page of a Google result. So we've given up. We've given them a pass. We call them digital natives, digital citizens, and we just given them a pass. And I think that we need to take a step back and understand that they don't know how to use these tools, and we need to teach them how to use these tools because they don't. And I was trying to think about an equivalent analogy in my generation, and for some reason, just because they were born with technology, born when there were laptops, we just assume they know how to use them. Doesn't mean they don't think about things in a different way, but how they use these tools and how they can vet information and make sense of information, that's what we need to work on. So yes, we need to work on educators, but we also need to work on this generation of students who don't know how to use these tools correctly.
Okay. Ayesha, do you have any thoughts about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of what we see, because we create a lot of the artificial intelligence for big companies, is that you have to upskill the teachers or the employees who are actually going to be participating in a new paradigm, whether it is in transportation. And by the way, we do very much talk about transport and technology, fintech, insurtech, transport tech, prop tech, edutech, because it fundamentally changes not only the business model, but operationally how people connect with each other and how they use the particular, both the content and the process. So I think teachers at the moment there are two aspects to it. One is that they have to be brought along for the journey. We do know that in Korea and other places, they are even experimenting, even in China, with robots in preschools. And the reason is not because robots are any better than teachers, but they are better than teachers who are just dialing it in with information. So first of all, teachers need to go onto a more personalized, empathetic, tutorial-based view of a student or a group of students, which is a new way of thinking, because like doctors, like lawyers, teachers have also been primarily repositories of information and knowledge, and that's taken up so much of their time that understandably they're overworked. So with automation and personalization through AI, hopefully we can give more support to them so that they can focus on actually making students feel better and do better. The other thing, however, is that even if you give them the tools, they lack a good understanding of the future. So what happens is that while, and like the keynote before was really good about that, but teachers need to understand what is the future going to look like, which is different than saying these are the tools you should use. Because unless you are speaking in a certain manner about the future and the disruptions that are coming, it's very difficult to communicate adequately with the students. And I think part of it is also, I'll give you a real life example with my kids. They go to school, it's a fantastic school, but like many schools in the US and everywhere else, there's a lot of talk about climate change and the pressures we face. And research shows that more and more high school students come out almost depressed about the situation. The issue is we give them these things that we understand, but we don't tell them that with technology, with creativity, with ingenuity, which human beings have always had, what can we achieve to tackle this? And the reason is because teachers are not well versed in AI or robotics or other things. So I think that they need to be well versed, not very, but at least be part of a system that's open to having experts come in and augment that future that they're communicating to the students. So it's both content, not just the tools that they should use.
So I'll turn to you, Provost Furton, to think about futuring, right? What could FIU's future look like? And to what extent can we as an institution feel free to be creative, really, and think about things that maybe if we think about what Tallahassee will allow us to do, or what the tuition dollars will allow us to do, would keep us down. But what are the dreams that we could have as a public research institution and to serve our students?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, to kind of piggyback on the last two comments is I think to facilitate teachers or faculty to promote technology in how they deliver their individual courses or the entire degrees, you you have to incentivize them. You have to provide incentives, and that could be incentives just as recognizing them, the ones that are going out and utilizing new tools and technologies and incorporating it and having their students learn and utilize technologies. Or it may require actual incentives in terms of financial incentives. First of all, you have to make sure you provide assistance, because oftentimes the faculty are not going to be as technically literate as some of the younger students who they may be educating. So I think it's going to take a different model, because I mean, humans fear change, and so there's going to be a small subset of individuals that want to do something differently, and there's even a smaller subset. There's a reason the academy hasn't changed much in 2,400 years, and then certain sub-disciplines have changed much slower. So it's not even at K through 12 or higher education. It's within disciplines. So we actually just had a meeting with the deans of colleges of medicine in the state of Florida, and medicine doesn't. If you take an online class, that is a disqualification in some medical schools to get into medicine, because they fear online. But at the same time, once they graduate from medical school, 100% of their continuing medical education is online. It's a complete disconnect, and part of it is just there's never been any incentives or any evaluation, and that was what they said. How do you evaluate that technology-enhanced education is the same or better than, I'll call it old-fashioned, because I like the pejorative term that you can do it the old-fashioned way, or you can do it in a new way. And I think it requires an incentive so that faculty try it. They need to be provided assistance, because it's going to be harder to teach it than the way they've been teaching it. And then you need to evaluate it empirically, and once they can demonstrate it empirically to themselves, then they can share it with their colleagues. And it's different if they're a music teacher, or if they're a chemistry teacher, or if they're an English teacher. So it really gets into the discipline, and you need those evangelists within the individual disciplines to get technology infused. If we do that at FIU, we have the right model, we can be a model for higher education, in the state of Florida, America, maybe even to change the academy, because we are so large. We're at 58,000 students. We're one of the biggest universities in the world. And if we can change what we do with our diverse population and our diverse community, then it's very difficult for other universities to say that it can't be done there.
And we are an engaged anchor institution. Most of our students will go on to live and work the rest of their working lives in South Florida, in the environs. And Ayesha, you've done a lot of work with smart cities. So when we think about the fact that our graduates at FIU will become the next mayor, they're on the city council, they'll be working in the county and all of the different aspects of government, they'll be most of our teachers. What kind of digital literacies will our students need to have in the world of work, just right here, to keep our South Florida healthy and strong?
Well, technology is now being used for water, transportation, education, healthcare. Regardless of whether you are a techie or not, you need to understand some of its basics. And the reason is that's the only way that agency remains with you. You feel empowered and confident entering into boardroom meetings where at least some part of the conversation inevitably is going to be around the use of data and artificial intelligence at a minimum. Now, the issue is that we don't teach either engineers or business people how to have an ethical framework for dealing with technologies. Whether it is data privacy, data security, we focus on teaching them the techniques. When I was in New York and Wall Street, when we evaluated any particular system, it was always whether it worked or it didn't work. And now there's a third element, what may be its unintended consequences. So these are the kind of moral dilemmas, some of them are governance issues. If you empower people to make these decisions, regardless of what role they play in anywhere from an organization to a city, they feel like they can participate in that discussion and make the choices that reflect the values of Florida and of the university and the community. Otherwise, the tendency is to optimize for efficiency, or if it's a profitable, profit-seeking organization, for profit, which is understandable to a degree, but given the consequences of manipulation and other such things, especially when it comes to citizens, we have to be very careful. So I think that is what I would call basic literacy. Basic understanding about how systems work, data science works, but equally how the new social contract and how its ethical governance work. So both go hand in hand.
Do you have some? I bet you have some thoughts on that, Jaime.
Well, I think, again, it's this idea that technology is this new thing, and it's not. It's something that's been, I think about, I live in Phoenix, and our entire water system, our canal system, is built on top of what the Hohokam Indians built 1,500 years ago. A canal system is a technology that they use, right, in its purest definition. From there, we keep adding new technology and new technology. I think that technology just becomes a thing that becomes part of everything across the board. Now, in education, what's interesting for me about technology, in the way we think about it, whether it's cloud computing or machine learning or artificial intelligence, is that it can help me make better decisions based on the curation of information, right? Like, how do we use the technology to turn information into intelligence? But a lot of us are still in the world of just putting information in our kids' heads, and we need to get away from that. And again, an understanding that the education system served us for a long time, and it did pretty well for the most part. It didn't serve everyone, but that's a different conversation than saying that what we need to do now is the same thing, right? When I was a kid, if you asked me what happened on December 7th, 1941, and I didn't know, I'd say, I'll come back tomorrow and I'll tell you, right? Because I had to go find a book that told me what. I mean, most of you were able to go home and look in your encyclopedias. I didn't have I grew up poor. We didn't have. I had M, right? We had like one volume. We had the M. The sales guy would come by and sell you the one for $9.99, right? Every year I had the M. So if you asked me an M question, I was all in. But today I can look that up. Right? And what that causes is an information overload of all the world's information in your fingertips. And this is why I think it's important for kids to have good digital skills, because what if all of a sudden I started looking up what happened on 7th, 1941, and all of a sudden this kid starts seeing, well, there's a great hoax of the Pearl Harbor was never attacked and it's all made up and it was the government. I'm like, whoa, right? So that's why those skills are important, because at least when I went to go look for information, there was a really good chance that the information was semi-credible, that it was in a library, that it was in a book, that it went through a process. And today, anyone can make up anything that they want. And so it's more important to work on these digital skills and understanding and using machine learning and artificial intelligence to help do that, right? To help figure out whether things are real or not real and what's a hoax and what's not a hoax, because I think that's the world that we live in now. And hoaxes are... I'm afraid of where we are going with this idea that anyone can post anything that they want.
Okay, so what does this look like in the classroom, right? So in our institution, at most institutions, we have a division of online learning. We have an FIU online division. We have lots of instructional designers. They're over here. They're in a building over here. They report to a different part of a different vice president of the university. And then we have our departments. And in the classroom, we generally have an instructor of record, a faculty member, and maybe they're served by an instructional designer, or they can go to a unit to ask for help. Is that a sustainable model? Do we need to be thinking about the instruction of courses being co-taught, if you will, or co-facilitated, co-designed, co-imagined, co-assessed by a discipline-specific expert and a technologist, a media literacy specialist? Is it even possible to teach a course with one teacher anymore?
I think we're, that is the model that we're following here at FIU is most of our faculty are teaching online courses, which are they have technical assistants and they have people to help them with their courses, and then they're also teaching traditional courses. And then the issue eventually it's going to be a blurred line, and it's all going to be technology-enabled coursework. I think one of the challenges is though that if you go back to sort of the literacies, I think faculty as well as students and staff have to understand the basic constructs of things such as artificial intelligence and machine learning, and also emotional intelligence, and how are humans different? What are things that humans could do that machines cannot, and not to fear it, because I agree. Technology has always been there. I go back to the earliest form of technology, and I wasn't born at the time, but in 1956, the Space Commander came out. Zenith created a clicker. It was literally click and change channels. My dad said, before that you had to have a lot of kids so they'd get up and change the channel for you. Then in 56 they came out with the clicker. And then over years there's been automation. So now then they came out with the dishwasher, and they came out with the pool vacuum. They came out with the, now the floors are vacuum. And of course now you can order anything you want just talking into a speaker. And each of those things actually just take away a lot of the mundane tasks that people used to do. And so I've never seen anybody get up and change their channel on their TV. They can still do it. There's little buttons there. So if you want to do that, you can do that. You can still wash your dishes if you want. I still do that sometimes just to relax. But I don't have to. I can take that time that I used to do those mundane tasks and then now apply it to actually working and mentoring my students or doing my research. So I find it liberating. So I think once we set up a model so faculty feel the same way, so some of the things that are mundane, like grading papers and answering questions in class, like is this going to be on the exam, and things like that, if they can spend that time facilitating learning and actually creating new knowledge, then they'll embrace it more. But part of it is still that fear, not understanding, and frankly, some people are alarmists and make it sound like there's going to be this gigantic disruption in higher education, like one organization is going to come up with something and replace 4,600 universities in the United States, and that's not the kind of disruption that's likely to occur.
So when we talk about technological innovations, we are automatically starting to talk about companies, right? So we have the CEO of a company here. We have Google present. So when we talk about fear, I'll be honest, I have a little bit of fear because I'm wondering who's making the decisions around the deployment of digitalization and the use of technology. Are they governments that are making these decisions? Are they the deans and the provosts and the faculties of institutions? Or are they corporations? Should one or the other be the ones making these decisions? Should it be a collaboration? And if it is a collaboration, what could this look like? Can you share with us any insights into how you, in your work in the corporate world, partner with people outside of the corporate world to make good decisions for organizations and society?
Was that for me?
Anybody who wants to take this.
Well, so I think part of it is, and I say this a lot when people talk to me about kids and technology in general and who's responsible for the technology, the ethics of the technology and all those things, and absolutely we should be thinking about those things, but we should also not romanticize the past, right? Let's remember that we used to in this country, make people drink out of 2 different water fountains, right? The past isn't all that great. So the idea that the technology, that the world was better 50 years ago and that things were great 50 years ago doesn't really exist. And so I think it's important to have those discussions, but what I'm excited about is the wisdom of crowds, right? The idea that people, if educated, if good citizens, they will control, hopefully, kind of what comes out of corporate America and government and all these other things, because they're the ones who are driving, where the information is. Again, remember this idea of like, well, is the corporations that are driving information, or is it government? Or, I mean, I remember when I would get on a subway in New York and everyone was reading the exact same paper, right? They're reading the exact same paper, the exact same article. So did media control people back then, right? Because I didn't have access except to that one newspaper. Who drove the information back then, right? So this is a conversation that we should always be having. But back to your idea in terms of like this idea of what, I giggle, I said this before, I giggle when I hear the term artificial intelligence because we're nowhere near the potential of what we can do with this, and we're not really talking about what we can do with it. And what I mean by that is, I think you can learn anything today, right? The ability to learn anything is amazing. I think we can use artificial intelligence and machine learning to get us closer to what good education looked like 240 years ago, right? Or even 1,000 years ago. Because if you think about the best model of education, it was when we had mentorships or not apprenticeships. Yeah, when we had apprenticeships where I would work with you for 20 years until I got good at what I did, and then I would go off on my own, and I'd bring somebody else on, and that one-to-one kind of learning would be awesome. You'd have an expert. And I think that artificial intelligence and machine learning has the potential to do that, right? So when I started my YouTube channel, I knew nothing about videography. I've always been a photographer, but knew nothing about how to shoot film, how to do film, how to edit, nothing. I didn't even know my camera had a record button. I mean, nothing. And my daughter, who's a video producer, an expert, I asked her, hey, what do I need to know? Where do I start? What's the first thing I need to know? And she said, okay, listen, just start here. Shoot at 24 frames per second, double your frame rate, keep your ISO at 100. If you go outside, use an ND filter, and a couple other things. And I said, cool. What do any of those words mean? And then I taught myself, never taken a class, taught myself how to shoot video and how to edit it and do those things. I would love to have an apprenticeship type of model where someone could judge what I'm doing, what I'm learning, and say, no, do this differently, do that differently. No, do that, I would love a person, but if I can't have a person that guides me through that, I'd love a machine to help guide me through that process. And I think that's the potential that we can do, is to create a model that we used to use, which was that apprenticeship model in education.
Okay, you were talking about having a relationship with a machine.
Yep.
And I know that this is...
You already have one. Everyone here has a relationship with their phone.
We have. I know that when my phone is not nearby, I feel it, right? I feel some kind of empathetic, I don't know, an empathetic understanding, but a sense that a presence that is normally with me is not there the way I would with a person. And I know, Ayesha, you do a lot of work around that piece about the relationship between humans and machines in society. Can you share with us a little bit about your perspective around that? Because the first thing we hear when we think about that is like me and a robot, like this cold, but that's not what you're talking about when you're talking about the relationship between humans and technology.
I mean, no, not necessarily. I mean, there are a couple of things, right? There are co-workers that we have as artificial intelligence agents or robots. They don't necessarily need to look like humans. There are caregivers or teachers. So they will come in many different roles, and they will come in many different ways. They might be voices out of an Alexa or Google Home, or they might actually manifest themselves in your smartphone as an artificial intelligence agent. I think it's important that they should always reveal themselves as an AI, because that immediately sets the relationship and expectations for the human and gives them an understanding of what is going on. The worst thing that we see now is that children are engaging online, sometimes with AI bots, giving away information, becoming vulnerable without being aware that it is not a human being. Of course, there are terrible adults who do that to children too. But it's important that all our interactions between humans and artificial machines should be with knowledge. The second thing is, yes, we will develop some relationship. We are not seeing that so much in any field except in healthcare for the elderly, where many countries, including in Singapore, China, Japan, have started experimenting with robots as companions in old people's nursing homes, and they have been shown to make people feel better. So I think that we will have various kinds of relationships. Again, I'm on the ethics committee in Singapore. We are constantly dealing with these guidelines because the room for manipulation is very big. And it is very important that we make sure the data is secure. So the big question is, you're digitizing the entire human experience of learning. This is fantastic. What are you doing with all that data? The Wall Street Journal had an article about some schools in China that are using headsets. And it tells you if they're concentrating or not, the children. This is an experimentation, but what are you going to do with that information? And children, as we well know, do not have the agency at such a young age to make those decisions. So especially for younger people, but even for older ones, we do need to think about, there's always good. Obviously, you learn better. I already told you in Asia, I'm seeing the benefits. But again, we must proceed with caution and respect human data rights as well.
So when you talk about this ethics commission that you're on, who sits on a commission like this?
So that's a really important question. The wrong answer would be that it's only data scientists and machine learning engineers. The right answer is that it should always include a political scientist, maybe even a political philosopher. It should maybe include an anthropologist. It should be very interdisciplinary. And of course, business and industry experts. We are putting the committee together right now, but I have made this precise recommendation that only having lawyers and engineers and policymakers is not enough of a good mix. Actually, we can learn a lot from the humanities about how society, as very rightly pointed out earlier, has dealt with technology historically and use those lessons to inform this much faster, much more exponentially scaling technologies that we face now.
And where would you recommend that commissions like this be placed? I think maybe you're talking about one that's a governmental commission, but do you think that institutions, corporations, schools, communities might be able to use commissions like this as well? Do we need a network of people kind of making good decisions around technology and the relationship between technology and people?
Absolutely. I'm a huge advocate of more people having this discussion, but you must pair it with giving them the knowledge to have this discussion in a reasonable manner that leads to good outcomes, which is why I pointed out earlier that digital literacy foundations must include the critical thinking and evaluation of these smart technologies that we use. When people graduate with that knowledge or that framework, already when they enter into committees and companies, they're armed with this very important piece of education, a new piece of education that we must impart, and that is the responsibility of universities. Then only it will not be an emotional conversation, but it will be one that is educated and that actually moves us forward as society. But the more people that participate in this, the better.
So I'll open up this question to the whole panel. I'll be honest, I think I probably interact with bots and don't know it. I think I probably interact with AI at times when I'm not aware of it. I would like to become more aware of these kind of cutting edge, these things that are coming at me from the future and the present. Where do I go to get reliable information about the technologies of the present and what might be happening in the future? I don't want to just go to Hollywood, right? Where are the resources that faculty, students, community members, where should we go for good, dependable information?
I think it's a good question because we're just getting started with this, right? And right now you're worried about like contacting customer service because your phone's not working and you think you're talking to a person and you're talking to a bot. I usually start there. My assumption is I'm talking to a bot first, and then I look for personal things if it's actually a person, right? So I start there. But that's not what I would be concerned about. What I would be concerned about is reading a New York Times bestseller and then realizing that a machine wrote that book, right? Like, when is that going to happen, right? That is a whole other world that you don't think about. Like, when you look at a piece of art, did a human make that art, or did a person make that art? When you're reading press releases now that are, and there's some experimentation out there right now that are being written by AI engines, right? So it's a very good question to ask. I don't know if there's actually an answer, because it's almost like saying, to me, it's, again, I always like to think about the past and try to relate what it is what's going on to the past. And it would be like in the 1980s asking a question, where can I go to find out that all these things that they're trying to sell to me on late night television is actually, that these things actually work, right?
Yeah.
Right? Because they don't work, but somehow on the TV they always work, right? And so we've always asked questions like that. So I think it's a good question, because I mean, just look at Toy Story 1 and Toy Story 4, and just in 20 years, what we've been able to produce in terms of just a movie. And yeah, one day you're not going to be able to, like right now, there's a new TV that just came out that's an 8K TV, right? That's a great marketing tool, because you can't actually see an 8K, but okay. But you know who can see an 8K? Machines. Machines can see an 8K. So all of a sudden now, you're going to start, machines are like, what do you mean you can't see that tree there? There's a tree there, right? Like there's a whole world here that we have to worry about. Now I freaked you out. Look at you.
Well, and from my perspective, I don't really care whether it's a machine or a human, because like you, I assume it's a bot until proven otherwise. And in education, does it really matter if a learner is acquiring the information, and then we can demonstrate that they've acquired that information? How much of it's done by a machine, how much of it's done by human? That human-machine interface is going to be critical. And like I say, over time, the machines will be doing more in terms of some of the mundane things that we are currently doing. So when I vacuum the floor versus my D-bot vacuuming the floor is vacuumed, and I think we put too much of an emphasis on that. We should put more of an emphasis on protecting the students from things like cybersecurity, because whether it's a human that's getting their information, or whether it's a bot getting their information, that's the biggest challenge that we have in terms of some of these social challenges. And I always simplify it down to, people want to be secure, they want to be healthy, and then you want to have a good environment, right? Because if you're, if somebody hacks your identity, or if you're have a sickness, or there's a hurricane coming, it's not you don't feel very good. So those are three basic things that we need to solve, and machines and play a role in all three areas at that interface with humans and machines. And so I don't think you're going to, in the future, you won't be able to know whether you're speaking to a human or a machine, but I don't know that it necessarily matters in many cases. If you're feeling sick and you're talking to your doctor, and it turns out your doctor is a machine, as long as you get healthy, is there a problem with that?
Mm-hmm. Ayesha, do you have anything that you wanted to add to that about where we can go for either hints about what's coming from the future, or more understanding of what our current experience with machines and AI is?
There's not one source, unfortunately. Even though people like Andrew have put together deep learning websites, for example, this is one example, and has put together a whole content system around it where he sends out a newsletter. So I actually sign up for quite a few newsletters. MIT Technology Review, could be TechCrunch, could be from some of these professors and some of the sites they've set up. That's always useful, because they are keeping an eye on things that are happening. And more than that, they are critically evaluating it, not just gushing about what's happening. So I think that's the best we can do. And the other thing is to take some of these courses. Even I continually audit courses on Coursera and take courses on Audacity. I look at conferences such as this one and I watch the videos. We actually have to do some self-curation or subscribe to newsletters that do this self-curation. However, I would really hope that universities take on this responsibility and actually become curators of this information, because obviously the trust factor that I would have in a university like yours would be much higher, and it would be one place where I would have. So you would need some faculty and maybe some people in the industry, and you would form some kind of group together, and this would be perhaps an additional thing that you do for all your students, your lifelong learners, and even others such as myself across the world who would subscribe to it.
Until those newsletters you subscribe to all of a sudden get written by AI, and then they start seeing bad articles written about them, and they start hiding those articles and start giving you what they want you to see, right? Then what do you do?
Totally, that's going to happen too. By the way, we actually work on robo-journalism
Right.
for a leading newspaper, so we know what it's like.
Right.
It's not very good, but it's coming.
It's coming. But so let me throw a radical idea out here, which is you start one of these questions of like, how do we help teachers create the digital skills that they need to teach in the classroom? What if we don't worry about that, right? And what I mean by that is, what if we just concentrate educators on teaching human skills, right? Focused on teaching problem solving and teaching collaboration and critical thinking and creativity. Because the one advantage that humans have over machines are in those areas, are in collaboration, are in creativity, are in, machines are very logical. They take A and B and they make C, right? You, as a human, can take A and F and make R, right? And they might not yet anyway, they'll get there. But right now, like teaching those human skills and then move away from, or let machines figure out how to do some of the other stuff. So for example, take English, an English teacher. Yes, you can teach basic English and you can have an English teacher teach English, but I have a machine now, Grammarly, anyone use Grammarly?
Grammarly.
Grammarly?
Grammarly.
I don't know why they come up with these names. Grammarly, where now, if you're using it, you know that not only do they help you with words and sentence structures and spelling, because English is my second language, so I don't understand why every word isn't spelled the way it sounds. But all the Latin people in the room going, yeah, and now it's actually giving me feedback on tone, right? So a new thing that just came out on tone. So now when I write emails, there's like a friendly face, like you're very friendly. Most of mine are just like evil faces, like sounds like an evil email. So like I'm getting AI feedback on my tone and what I'm writing through a machine, and I'm okay with that. But what I want is a human to tell me, who should I be sending that email to, right? Who should I be collaborating with? What ideas? How do I generate better ideas? How do I create original thought? Like, what if, instead of worrying about teachers and whether they should know technology, what if they were focused on helping build those critical human skills?
Mm-hmm. So in a few minutes, we're going to open up the floor to question and dialogue with their audience, but I would be remiss if we didn't talk about the elephant in the room. So 2 weeks ago, we had the climate strike. The climate strike. Yeah. So we're here in South Florida, ground zero for climate change, sea level rise. And so I have kind of a two-parter question. One has to do with technology's impact on the environment. So we were talking about, we got to have the latest and greatest hardware, right? So what steps are already being taken that we don't know about or that need to be taken? Throw a challenge to our engineers, to our architects, to our chemists, to our scientists, to close the gap on sustainability and materials. So that's one piece. What technology, the hardware's impact on society. But then also, how can technology alleviate and help to solve some of the challenges that we have? You could take it from either approach.
I'll start. I think I think that the whole environmental movement started the wrong way. In the 70s and the 90s and today, I think the message, the marketing plan of the environmental movement has been wrong. It's save the planet, save the whales, you know, t-shirts with save the planet. The planet's fine. Florida can go underwater, the planet doesn't care. The planet's gonna be fine. You can launch every nuclear bomb and 10 million years from now, the planet's not gonna care that you were here at all, right? As a matter of fact, I read a fascinating article, I think it was in Atlantic, about the fact that if we all disappear in 100 million years, there might not be any trace that we existed at all, right? Like, because, you know, if you think about the fact that dinosaurs roamed the earth for 180 million years, and we barely find a bone, right? Can you imagine what we're going to leave behind and what they're going to find 100 million, 200, 300 million years from now? So I think the t-shirt has to say, save our asses, right? Like, that's what the t-shirt has to say. Because that's what it has to be about. It has to be about us. It can't be about the planet. And so some of the phrases and words can't be about how do we create sustainable development for the planet and resources. No, it's about us, right? Like, how do we save us, right? That's what it should be about. And the great thing about this next generation is that they recognize that. 86% of them, like I said earlier, believe that humans have caused climate change. They're not having a debate about whether it exists or not, right? And 70% of them believe that it's going to impact them in their lifetime. So think about it from a young person's perspective. The house is on fire, and you're worried about tax cuts. And you're worried about whatever, right? Like, they don't, so my hope hangs on this next generation, and what I think we need to do is get out of the way and help them and provide them the resources and tools that they need to solve some of these problems, because I think that's where it's going to come from.
And I do believe, it's important to have some alarm, but there's too much alarmism, and people then don't take it seriously either, because if you take it to one extreme. So like back in the 70s, we were going to run out of petroleum, and we were all worried about, and it causes strife across the entire world, because we were, back then 10 years away from running out of fossil fuels, and we had to, conserve and figure out and change the cars and all that. Well, we're never going to run out of fossil fuels, because eventually they're going to be replaced by different energy before we do that, because technology found ways that we don't want, like fracking and things like that, to find additional fuels. And so technology is, generally, there's reasons to fear it, but there's also reasons to have optimism that we'll find ways to mitigate what's going to happen. And so if you make it relevant to people, I think they respond more quickly. So to a wealthy person that has a home, multi-million-dollar home on the water, and you tell them, that home's going to be underwater in 30 years, they're like, well, I'm going to be selling it for twice that, what I bought it for 5 years from now. So I'm not really worried about 30 years from now. But if you say, well, in a few years, you won't be able to afford insurance, and nobody's going to buy your house, it's going to go down in value, then you make it relative to them, and that we need to figure out ways to mitigate the effects of climate change. I've had discussions with people, again, about, is it human caused? Is it natural? And I say, who cares? There's enough energy in the oceans that sea level is rising. Why are you having this debate? It's a waste of time right now to have a debate, humans versus natural. If humans didn't exist, would we be seeing sea level rise? That's not the point. The point is humans are contributing, and we have to. That's one of the mitigation strategies. But stop having these silly debates over who caused what and so forth. We know it's there. We have to figure out ways to adapt, and it is one of the greatest challenges of our time that we have to deal with.
Right. It would be like a giant meteor that's 12 football fields deep coming straight at us, right? Knowing that it's going to crash on Earth and split us in half, and us saying, "Oh, it's just natural." That's just without trying to stop that from happening, right? Like I think we would as humans we would try to stop that from happening, but for some reason with this, it's natural, so it's just going to happen anyway.
Ayesha, we lost you for a second, but you're back.
Great. Now, I heard the conversation, and I agree. I think we need to be very solution-oriented and problem-solving oriented. If you look at other things, such as healthcare, which is also in very bad shape, especially in the emerging markets. We have great innovations like Butterfly IQ, which is a handheld ultrasound, and that is helping the 4.7 billion people who have no access to imaging technologies. So I think we need to do what we're doing in some of the other industries, which is acknowledge and accept. And I think most people do now. The fact that there's something wrong, we need to do something about it. And human beings need to be the engines for solving this issue, frankly, because we are responsible for creating it as well. So I think that part of this, again, comes back to the thing is the content of the education that you're teaching kids. It's not only about how, it's also what you're teaching. And part of problem solving has to be done in conjunction with the technology. You cannot decouple the two because a lot of the solutions are standing on the shoulders of those technologies.
Thank you. So what we'd like to do now is open the floor to questions from all of you. We have, I understand, people with microphones who are ready to, yep, we do, who are ready to run towards you when you raise your hand or stand and let us know that you have something that you would like to share or a question that you'd like to pose to our panelists. And when you do get up the courage to ask that question, if you would let us know your name and maybe what part of the university or what university or other organization you hail from.
So this is for our provost. In thinking about
Would you share who you are?
Sorry, Leanne Wells. I'm the senior director for the Center for Advancement of Teaching here at FIU. When thinking about technology and how we might engage our students in the classroom with technology, and our faculty are using it as a matter of course, rather than for the sake of using technology, our structures that have been built around education and learning and teaching are not designed for that kind of learning, right? Our classroom spaces, the way that our classrooms look, the way that our faculty interact, our teachers interact with students and students interact with faculty in those spaces don't allow for what happened with your son to happen. I love that story of him, designing and using the, what's that called, the game, Minecraft? Like learning all of those things using Minecraft in an environment where he's learning from others and others are learning from him. We have made some efforts to advance our classroom spaces and active learning classrooms, but we still have a huge portion of our classroom spaces that are the traditional space. How do we move from those traditional spaces that don't contribute to the form and function of teaching and learning with technology in a collaborative way?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think innovations that require you to fundamentally change the physical space are not scalable because, you can do it gradually over time and over years and over decades, but that's not the kind of change that we need. So I think it is developing new ways to leverage the latest technology so that they can be adapted for any of our classes. And to me, it really revolves around this device, which is the machine-human interface. And as was mentioned earlier, this is the most primitive device that students are going to see. And as you have 5G and you have new technologies that can be integrated, if you can align it with their phone and then make the phones accessible to everyone. So when you have 5G technologies and you've got maybe for students who are on full Pell eligible, they get a free phone. We work a way that while they're at school, and then integrate that in so that is their interface. And like we're talking about with Involvio, doing automated attendance in the classroom. Anything that we can do that, again, frees up the faculty so that they can focus on new ways to engage the students. Right now, many faculty are just afraid of the phone because it's a way that students can cheat. Well, guess what? Students have figured out how to cheat for generations. That this is just the latest thing, right? They don't have to slip a little piece of paper into their slide rule now. They have the phone, but to flip it around and figure out, work with corporations on what are things that can be developed so that this device can be a facilitator of learning in the classroom and taking it in a completely different direction. If you let them use their phones and you find ways that they can do it, then it'll be, I think, much more engaging. And the issue we've got, accreditation is one of the things that people fear and say, oh, well, that's going to hold back changes. It really doesn't, because there's nothing in accreditations of universities. You're always going to need credentialing of faculty, so you need the Plato or the Aristotle who's going to be there with the education. But how they deliver it, they don't force you to any way you can deliver it that the students master the material and you can show the student learning outcomes. You can completely transform the university, even doing everything completely, virtually, with including using machines and humans, and it'll be totally accredited degree or certificate or badge or whatever you want. So I think it's really up to creative faculty to figure out ways to do things differently. And actually, you're sitting next to our chair of our faculty senate, who's a physicist, a nuclear physicist, and he developed an entirely different way to teach physics and saw a tremendous increase in the students' success in the classroom. But unfortunately, we haven't scaled it, because then the next physics, he becomes chair of the faculty senate, and so we have to figure out how to scale, maybe take the way that Jorg was teaching in his classroom and put it into a platform so that all faculty could teach that way easily, because he probably would tell you the reason other people don't do it, it was probably more work and more difficult to do it than the traditional way. But technology can help us now.
But it's also changing the culture and the models, right? Like even the idea of taking a test, right? Imagine in a typical freshman class, students are taking a test, and at the end of the test, there's two students at the back of the class, and they come up to you and they say, yeah, we were sitting back there, and I realized that there were some answers that I knew, and there were some answers that she knew, so we decided to combine our skill set. Here you go. Here's our test, right? Like, what would be your reaction, right? Why are we teaching students that collaborating is cheating? Why are we teaching students that finding people who are smarter than us is cheating, when that's all I do is find people who are smarter than us, right? And so what is that, when you change that model, then all of a sudden you can start looking at different things. Because we say collaboration in education, but we don't mean it, right? We're still talking about group work, right? Collaboration is not assigning one paper to 4 students where one student writes it and the other 3 pay that student, right? That's how I got through school. Real collaboration is the ability to ask questions and the ability to take information and convert it to intelligence and motivate and influence and build consensus, right? Those are the types of skills. And so when you change the expectation of what it is that you're measuring and what you're trying to do, then you'll start seeing the use of these tools in different ways as opposed to trying to replace the current system.
So I'm Tracy Weiler, and I'm in the College of Medicine.
There you are.
There I am.
Would you stand, Tracy, just for a minute so we can see you? Good.
So my question has to do with this lifelong learning piece. We come here, we are professors, we know stuff, right? And we give that to our students. But we should be lifelong learners too, right? And we need to be given the opportunity and the space to do that. And I don't feel that we are given that time and ability or opportunity to do that so that we can do that for our students. And I just wondered what you envision about changing the paradigm so that in addition to us being teachers for our students, we can be learners so that we can learn stuff so that we can be teachers for our students.
I think that's a great question, and there's actually been some discussion at the university level about that related to our next quality improvement program as part of the tax reaccreditation, reaffirmation. And so as we're moving towards credentialing, micro-credentialing, and doing digital badges for our students, we're talking about requiring them to take 1 or maybe 2 badges and then having a variety of badges available. Then the idea is that everyone would have to do at least one of these badges, the faculty, the staff, and the students, and start to get into that cycle. And then most of these micro-credentials that we're talking about that our students need to have, which are based on the latest technologies, AI and cybersecurity, and you can go on, are the same kind of things that we should be learning, and we could do the same badges. So we're actually having those conversations, because you're right, it's in cases like medicine, once you get your MD, then those doctors are using online. They have to do continuing education because it's required for their profession, but professors aren't required to do that. I'm a forensic scientist, and there's no requirement that you go through and get licensed to be a forensic scientist. So I can go testify in a capital murder trial as an expert witness. I don't have to have a license, but if I want to cut somebody's hair, I have to get a license. So it's kind of crazy across different professions.
I just want to add a couple of things. One is, don't subscribe to my YouTube channel, because in a couple of weeks, there's going to be a video that comes out that's called "You're Not Busy, Stop Saying You Are," right? And it's based on a couple of different articles and research that I've read about how busy we think we are and how busy we actually aren't, right? And so I think it's a mindset as terms of what you do with your time. And I can't even see you, so I'm not pointing you out specifically. I'm saying that that's a mindset for people that we need to think about. I think this is the most exciting time. You can learn how to do anything. And I sit in first class a lot because I get upgraded, and I sit up there with people who are really busy. They're busy, and all they do is sit there on their iPads and watch movies. They're not busy. If you're binge watching Netflix, you're not busy, right? And so it's a mindset to think about what you want to spend your time doing. And the research that I read that kind of floored me was, you were talking about manual labor things before. All the things that we don't have to do manually anymore, like dishes and laundry and all these other things that now you just put into machines, and then you sit there and binge watch the new show on Netflix, and then you wake up the next day and talk about how busy you are, right? Like, so it's this mind shift to think about the world in a different way, because it used to be required that education had to be provided to you. And today that's not true anymore. You can learn anything. And so I think it's understanding of where we are in the world and how you take personal responsibility. Again, I'm not saying you, I don't know you, but taking personal responsibility to constantly, continuously learn.
Yeah, and Ayesha, we want to be cognizant if you had anything that you wanted to share on these regarding these last couple of questions.
She's very busy.
No, I totally agree, and I'm as guilty as anyone else. But I actually think that's a really good point about us having so many distractions because of this inundation of media. I was just reading that in Silicon Valley, there's a new trendy fast called the dopamine fast, in which people just completely stop using any kind of media. But more than that, even if a conversation is too exciting, they'll stop the other person because it releases too much dopamine.
Oh my God! Oh my God! This is why I don't live in Northern California, by the way.
I thought that was really funny, but I think it comes from the right idea, which is that being constantly stimulated by media and information, we are losing control, but we don't have to. We have to pull back and choose what we spend our time on. And I also love Netflix. So I'm as guilty as anyone else. But I think that this is a very valid point and a very serious one. If as adults we can't control ourselves, how can we teach students?
Yeah, absolutely.
This is why I don't live in Northern California. Every time I land in Northern California, I tweet out, "I smell kale." I don't.
Absolutely. Do we have any? Yes.
Leilani Bamanis. I'm a professor at Johnson & Wales University. And one of the things that I do, in addition to being a professor of international business, I help co-facilitate a program called X Culture. And X-Culture is an organization that comprises of over 200 universities around the world. And we put together global virtual teams of 5 to 7 students from any country in the world that want to participate in our program. So one of the challenges that we find, and I think that this is a great question to pose for all three of you guys, the problem that I think we in addition to the time zone difference, in addition to the language barriers, in addition to the cultural barriers, is the equality in technology and access to something so simple that we all take for granted called Wi-Fi. I was just saying in the presentation that my colleague and I presented that right now I'm running an X-Culture virtual program in my classroom, and one of my students complains about how she has a student in her team from India, and she pops in and out of their challenges given her access to Wi-Fi. So she might get materials getting pushed into her resources at 3 o'clock in the morning because the girl can only get access to 30 minutes of Wi-Fi at this time of the day. And so what I'm posing to you guys as leaders in technology is, how do we solve a problem where there is technological inequality? And then you're talking about giving us AI accesses where we're teaching students who can't even get Wi-Fi or who have to go to the library to use the computer. How do we solve that problem?
I think that's a perfect way to conclude today, is thinking about the digital divide, not just internationally, but in our own classrooms.
Yeah, I'll start, because when you think about it, and I've been at Google for 13 years, and what you see with that specific issue, again, when you look at it at a macro level, is that it's a temporary problem, right? That one of the issues that we face with bringing technology with Wi-Fi specifically is electricity, right? There's places in this world that don't have electricity. So how do you bring Wi-Fi to a place that doesn't have electricity, right? So, but there are different companies that are doing different things to try to find routes. So most of the world is not covered by roads, right? Lots of places are in remote areas. How do you bring fiber into these communities when you can't? So, Google launched Project Loon to put balloons in space that can get Wi-Fi to cover areas. But even with that, if you don't have electricity to fire up your laptop, how are you going to get to Wi-Fi, right? So that's one thing. Facebook has drones that they're launching. These companies, these big companies, are interested, for self reasons, to put technology, put Wi-Fi, put access as much as possible. But it's a temporary thing. It's just gotten harder because the terrain is harder, the environments are harder. Like, not having electricity is a huge problem. But I'm comforted in knowing that there's a number of organizations that are trying to solve that problem. I think the bigger challenge, at least here, because I try to focus on the US for the most part, is that we don't have an access problem anymore for the most part, because 93% of people in the US have access to the internet. The problem is that now we're suffering from what kind of access, right? And so in rich school districts, teachers are using technology in enriching ways, and in poor school districts, they're using them to do drill and kill skills, right? So I think that digital divide the definition of digital divide is transferred from not having access here in the US to having the wrong kind of access and using technology in the wrong way. And that's what I'm trying to figure out how to fight.
And who would you like to partner with on that? Can you partner with, are universities the right partners, our teacher education program?
Sure, if you have enough money, we could do it. I'm just kidding.
Is it just a money problem?
It's always a money problem, right? It's a money problem. It's a but again, it's a temporary problem. I mean, we like to think that we're all great here, but there's 1 billion people that live in India. There's 1 billion people that live in China. Like, that's where the markets of the future are, right? There's more students, there's more honor students in China than there are students in the US, right? So we're not all that great. So I think there's people that are trying to solve that problem because it's such huge markets that we're talking about.
Yeah, and we have the digital divide exists right here in Miami-Dade County. The same place there are food deserts, there's digital divides, and once that problem can be reduced, it would be a major step towards really transforming another part of higher education, which is having that global connection. Because right now, even though we like to brag how many students do study abroad here or other universities, it's a tiny fraction of the total student population actually studies abroad. So if they could actually collaborate abroad using technology and interconnecting universities, interconnecting communities, that's going to have a major ability to change, again, how we educate the world's population, not just in connecting our students with students around the world. And so solving that digital divide, I think, is absolutely crucial.
Indeed. And we'll give you the final word, Ayesha.
So I think that this question of the young lady from India is very pertinent. But I do think, as was mentioned earlier, that there are people who are working on this problem. And so, first of all, we know that mobile penetration across the developing world is increasing exponentially. There are more mobile phones in India than there are toilets. And secondly, telcos like Reliance are investing heavily in infrastructure and have bought down in competitive wars between other telcos the price of Wi-Fi and data access. And so we should begin to see some improvement. But regardless, it's not as good as what you would find in terms of speed as it is in the Western world. That is why many companies, including education companies, are now beginning to localize content for faster download and for easier access for countries like Africa, countries in Africa and India. So we have to use some kind of creative ways within the constraints of the current environment to allow these young men and women to have access. And by the way, it's actually even worse in some places in Africa, where the mobile phone is only allowed by the younger sister. She can only use it only very few times a week. And so there's a lot of issues also between not only the digital divide, but the gender divide also that we need to overcome.
Well, that's why we're here in the academy. That's why we're part of higher education, because every single one of us, we see a role that we can play in not only laying our own hands to the problems that we've discussed here today and the problems that we see in the world, but by creating cadres and cadres and cadres of other sets of hands to put to these issues. And so I'll just say, would you join me in thanking our experts, our guests, for sharing some inspirational ways that we can do that, and by helping us see the future and be more involved in the present. And so we do hope that you will stick around. We have a series of presentations to end the day, one of which will be right here on collaborative online international learning. We hope you'll stick with us, and thank you.
Thank you.